Apparently, that's the deadline that's been given for these 25,000 people on waiting lists to be cleared out completely. That's an absolute guarantee, is it, you give in government? I mean, you'll do anything, move mountains to make that happen, and if it doesn't happen, what then?
Well, Tony, can I just say, I think Tony Abbott here has lost touch with civility and he's lost touch with reality. What we've said is that we will invest $600 million in getting through the waiting lists, people who are being required to wait for more than the clinically appropriate times. We want to do that because we don't want to see elderly Australians waiting for a hip replacement for longer than they should. So we are going to invest to get it done. The Howard government hasn't done anything to match Labor's plan. If we look at what they've said in health, they haven't got a plan in this campaign, and they haven't had a plan for our national health system.
Now?
We haven't.
I mean, really
I'm not swearing at you, Tony. That's for sure. The Howard government doesn't have a plan for every hospital in Australia. We do. They have a plan for one hospital, and it's degenerated into a shambles. If this is the template for their reform, the Mersey Hospital, then we have to conclude that reform will be a shambles.
Let me make this point. There is no doubt taking over the Mersey Hospital is proving difficult. Imagine how hard it would be for Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard to take over 750 hospitals in the teeth of opposition from the premiers. But let's get back to this waiting list.
This is your reform. This is your template. This is what you should be proud of.
OK, let's talk about the waiting list promise, and then I'll come to the Mersey Hospital.
Does the buck stop with Kevin? And will Kevin resign, as Bob Carr promised to, if he doesn't succeed in reducing the waiting list by 25,000?
Well, this is a lot of silliness. Kevin has outlined...
Be civil, Julia.
I'm being perfectly civil, Tony. Kevin has outlined his plan for health. It's a health reform plan, working with the states. He said that he's going to hold them accountable, and if we're not getting the sort of progress we want, then he will seek a mandate from the people to take the health system over, the hospital system over nationally. That's a responsible plan. We've backed it with resources, $2.5 billion. Meanwhile, Tony's plan is to deal with one hospital. He can't even get that done.
All right, now Tony Abbott, your trifecta of bad news today was effectively completed with this, the news that the Mersey Hospital takeover wasn't going nearly as smoothly as you'd hope. You can't actually do it. In fact, possibly not until the election, by the sound of it.
Well, we'll do it as quickly as we can.
Can you do it before the election?
Well, there are some things that the Tasmanian government has to do, and we are in their hands for them to, A, give us a licence, because we can't give ourselves a licence, B, transfer contracts, because we can't transfer the contracts to ourselves, and the medical council issue has to be addressed, and that'll be addressed by the medical council.
How significant is the issue that you need to put staff onto AWAs in this hospital? That seems to be, according to the health minister in Tasmania, that's a core issue.
It's a complete furphy, an absolute and complete furphy.
So you're not putting them on AWAs?
Absolutely not. The point is this: to demonstrate our good faith, the Prime Minister made a declaration under the Public Service Act that as of the 1st of November, if necessary, the staff of the Mersey would be Commonwealth employees on exactly the same terms and conditions that they have as Tasmanian employees.
But, Tony, this is where it just gets bizarre. The Commonwealth says it wants to take over the Mersey Hospital. Prime Minister down there for a big announcement. They had absolutely no plan about how they would deal with the employment arrangements.
And you want to take over 750 hospitals.
The Tasmanian government is there saying you need a plan for employing the staff.
We have a plan.
They still can't cobble together a plan to employ the staff.
Okay.
But the one thing Tony should acknowledge is the effect of moving that hospital to new employment arrangements under the Commonwealth is that those people inevitably will end up in the work choices world.
You're like a
then he says, oh well, we won't have AWAs for them. Well, if AWAs aren't good enough for the staff at the Mersey Hospital, why are they good enough for any Australian? If they're good enough for other Australians, why won't the Commonwealth put them in at the Mersey Hospital?
I am all in favour of AWAs.
Well, why not at the Mersey Hospital then?
In a general sense. But the fact of the matter is...
they wouldn't work at the Mersey Hospital, is that what you're saying?
Given the recalcitrance of the Tasmanian government, I have more than enough on my plate. And she reckons she could take over 750 hospitals in one hit, even though 4 state premiers have said over our dead body.
Now we're repeating ourselves. Now, Julia Gillard, in terms of policy fiascos, you've actually no reason to look too smug yourself, in fact, because Labor's had a climate change policy that's turned into a fiasco during the course of this week. What happened?
Well, I'm not sure what you're referring to, Tony. I presume you're referring to some reports in the Australian newspaper. Yeah. But can I say the divisions in climate change are divisions within the Howard government?
What I'm talking about is the fact that Kevin Rudd had to correct and completely change a statement by his environment spokesman, Peter Garrett, who's now been put in a box with the lid nailed down, so it appears we can't even get to talk to him.
Well, what Kevin has said and what Peter has said is at the Bali meeting at the end of this year, we would be striving for an agreement covering developed and developing countries because we need a global solution to climate change. But they've also said to be at the right negotiating table, we need to ratify Kyoto. And that's the one thing Mr Howard won't do.
But in terms of the election, what's happened here is an issue which used to be Labor's, evidently, according to polls and the way many commentators look at it, has now shifted. The Prime Minister has embraced some of your policies. He says you've embraced some of his. You've come much closer together on climate change in the past few days. It is extraordinary.
Well, when I look at the government, what I see is a government in a dither. We've got Malcolm Turnbull saying let's ratify Kyoto. We've got a Prime Minister who says no. We've got Malcolm Turnbull saying we don't need nuclear. We've got a Prime Minister who says yes, we do. We've got Malcolm Turnbull bagging our mandatory renewable energy target today while the Prime Minister is saying he's considering it and might do a me too. We've got Malcolm Turnbull saying he wants to see zero emissions from electricity generation by 2050, and on your show last night, Tony, the Prime Minister refused to embrace that statement. Now, you couldn't have a bigger chasm between the Prime Minister and Malcolm Turnbull, who presumably now is being kept in some dungeon without electricity or air because they don't want him out and about in the campaign.
We've clearly got a telephone because he's on the radio this morning doing an interview about this. Tony Abbott.
Tapping out Morse code.
Did the Environment Minister seriously embarrass the Prime Minister, the Cabinet and others by going to the Cabinet and suggesting that Kyoto Protocol should be ratified?
We have a lot of very vigorous discussions around the Howard Cabinet table.
This was one of them, was it?
Oh, look, we have a lot of very vigorous discussions and an enormous number of things are canvassed around that Cabinet table because we're quite happy to think outside the square. At least
but when, this is my question. When Mr Turnbull came to the Cabinet asking you to think outside the square, how many people agreed with him?
Well, the point is not the course of the discussion. The point is the actual decision made. And we made the decision...
Well, did you agree with him, for example?
We made the decision that everyone is familiar with, but the truth is that this week the environment has become a difficult issue for the Labor Party. It was one of Labor's supposed electoral strengths, and thanks to Peter Garrett's inexperience and naivety, it's now a potential problem for them.
How did those cabinet discussions get in the public domain?
I don't talk about cabinet
but
discussions.
Why are we reading about them in the newspaper?
Well, look, Julia...
it is a legitimate question, though, isn't it? I mean, it must have been a shocking embarrassment for the Prime Minister during an election campaign to have, apparently, people inside Cabinet leaking what was going on at a very controversial Cabinet meeting.
No more of an embarrassment than Peter Garrett's interview on AM the other morning, followed by the rapid emergency meeting where Labor Party's policy changed to reflect that of the government.
Well, Julie Gillard, I mean, that is a point, isn't it? I mean, brand Labor, particularly on climate change, has been diluted this week, hasn't it?
Well, we are in front with plans for the future on climate change, ratifying Kyoto, our clean coal investment, our green car investment, working in partnerships with households to save water, save energy, and mandatory renewable energy target. What's been embarrassing is the Turnbull-Howard division.
We've got to wind up. We don't have time for everything, but brand Labor is changing on climate change, moving closer to the government.
I think brand Labor is out there in front, arguing what we need to do globally and locally. Meanwhile, of course, we've got a government so divided, someone, whether it was Malcolm Turnbull or someone else, decided that their cabinet deliberations needed to be in the public domain. Now, we don't know whether Malcolm Turnbull was thinking about the future of the nation or his future in Wentworth. I suspect the latter, but it would be interesting to know whether it was Malcolm or someone so malicious towards Malcolm who put this material into the newspapers.
Well, that's where we'll have to wind up. Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott, we thank you both for coming in, particularly Tony Abbott on a very difficult day.
No worries.